Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soccer Queens podcast, where we discuss everything female athlete performance training. Now, today's episode, this is the first time I've had a sports psychologist on the show. So, this is really exciting, and we're going to cover so much. I have Sarah Murray here, who has worked in professional soccer as a sports psychologist for 9 years and has practiced sports psychology for well over a decade. So, Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are ready to go. So, if you could just give a background of your career and who are you working with today?
Okay, sure. So many years ago, I come from a performance background, so I've always competed, trained, and played sport to a fairly decent level. I'm a hockey player, field hockey. I was much better at that than I was soccer, I realized. So I played national level hockey, and then I was a PE teacher for many years before retraining and spending the last 13 or more years as a sports psychologist working across multiple sports, but predominantly I've worked into soccer full time and understand the mindset behind soccer players, both men and women, and both older and younger. And that's where I've been until very recently. And this year I branched out, and currently I run my own business, Performance Edge Consulting, working across the high performance space with everything from youth athletes in soccer, across other sports, to leaders in business, to the military, and generally just working with people in high performance spaces to develop the ability to understand how we thrive and get the best from ourselves.
That's brilliant. Now, I do want to dive first into your philosophy, and I did see that you focus on the human first and then the athlete and player second. So, can you
Mm.
expand on that a little bit? Because I really resonate with that.
Yeah, sure. I think particularly with youth athletes and with young soccer players, the world around us now from a very young age, can make a young person or an adult feel like their value beyond the badge. And I always talk about beyond the badge, beyond the soccer team, beyond the whatever team you play for. Who are you? And having this sense of a strong, stable sense of identity, and that sense of beyond the badge, I have worth and I have value as a human being. And I'm a human first. And I happen to also play soccer or play tennis or be a musician, or, we all have multiple roles, sister, brother, daughter, partner, friend, student, soccer player. Yeah. So my philosophy is to really understand the human being in front of me. And I really truly believe that all behavior can be understood in context. So when we see young athletes, young soccer players they might be getting frustrated, we see certain behaviors. If we can understand a bit about them and who they are beyond the badge, it will help us understand why we see what we see in the performance environment. So as you can hear, I'm really passionate that, we really are human first, and what we do is something that is just a part of what we do.
I can definitely agree with that. And I do see a lot of the young players putting all their eggs in one basket and their identity in their sport. And the whole idea of specializing early and playing single sport travel year round starts, at least in the States, as young as age 7 or 8, and some of these young girls. And it's really hard to break out of that. And
Mm.
it could be the system's fault or the parents not really standing up to it. And I'm just trying to figure out how to solve this problem and get kids out of that. So what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on the current system now for youth?
Yeah. Well, firstly, if you solve the problem, let me know. I mean, that is like the $64 million question, isn't it? And I think it's when we're working with youth players, it's often when there is a very strong sense of self attached to sport, which, if I think back to my youth, and I imagine you might have been the same, there's a massive part of who I am that is wrapped up in sport and playing sport. And that is a double-edged sword, because actually often that can help with the commitment of the athlete to training and to progress and wanting to be better, because they're highly committed, they're highly invested. So it's coming from a place of strength, but like any of our strengths, when we overcook or we overplay a strength, it can be damaging and it turns into a bit of a weakness. So if we think about high drive, commitment, high passion for the game, these are a strength of elite young athletes. But when it's overcooked, that turns into burnout and what we call identity foreclosure. So identity foreclosure is when an athlete will, at the expense of everything else in their lives, friends, family, other hobbies, they will solely see themselves as a footballer, as a soccer player, as a rugby player, whatever it might be. And that's when actually challenges arise when we think about dealing with transitions, which are going to happen in sport. Some of them we expect to happen. Some of the transitions, deselection, being played out of position, having to move club, some of these things are not done by choice. And the tighter our identity and our self-confidence, our self-esteem, the tighter that's wrapped up in the sport, the more damaging it can be when we then have those changes, because instead of growing from the change, it can lead to the change being a bit of a threat rather than seen as an opportunity, because the whole of their being and self-worth will be so impacted by that.
How do you think parents can help with this to just ensure that their youth athlete doesn't get so tied up in their sport and not overdo it and try to find that medium?
Oh, it's such a difficult role, isn't it? And before we started recording, we touched, didn't we, briefly on talking about performance parents, as I call them. And first off, if there are any parents listening to this, my first words want to be thank you, because we don't have youth sport across the globe, do we, without parents who take their kids every early in the morning, every weekend, at the expense of themselves as people, to take part in sport. So a massive thank you. And it's a really tough job. I think parents that open up conversations around the end. So I've just finished writing a chapter. This is a shameless plug, but I've just finished writing a chapter for a book on performance parenting that I'm co-writing with a colleague of mine, Gordon McKelland. And the chapter I've finished writing is around this sense of, how can parents actually support difficult conversations with their children about identity and about who they are beyond the badge. As parents, it's important that we role model multiple identities, and be very careful of our language. Kids will pick up on the worth and value that we place on them as a parent just in the language we use. So there's a difference between a parent using the word career in sport when we're talking about a child versus journey. When we use words like career, the child of 7, 8, 9 years old is already thinking, oh my gosh, this means professionalism, this means pressure, this means expectation. When we use the word journey, we then are actually setting them up to know that it's a journey, and all journeys end and shift and change direction. So again, being really mindful of language, opening up difficult conversations with children around, what is it that they think of themselves when performance is bad. Where does their self-esteem and self-value lie beyond the badge? The best thing we can do is role model, and ensure that as parents that we don't identify solely as one thing. I'm not solely Sarah the sports psychologist. It's a huge part of who I am, absolutely, but it's not the only part of who I am. Therefore, if it shifts and changes, I'll be okay and I'll cope with the demands of that transition. So let's help our children to do the same thing.
I love that. And words really do matter with our youth. And too often I do hear parents saying to their elementary schoolers, you're a soccer player. And it's like, wait a minute, no, you're a kid. And how do you know at that age that they're going to be a soccer player, or they're still going to be good when they're a teenager or a college athlete? So it's just so important. And we're really excited for your book to come out. What's it called again?
So the book is called Performance Parenting. I can put a link. I can perhaps in some show notes to when it comes out. So it's with the publishers at the moment, and we're hoping for a Christmas release. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And it's interesting just to flip back to what you said a couple of seconds ago about I am statements. As a parent, just listen out for your child saying the I am statements. I am a soccer player. I am a tennis player. And of course, it comes from a place of strength because they love the sport and they're passionate about it. But let's just be mindful of what else they are and actually remind our children they are a child. They are a valuable young transitional human being, and they're definitely not mini adults, because if children were mini adults, what's the point of childhood? So again, it's a language thing around expecting adult behaviors or adult actions from a child. They're children.
Yeah, and just placing that identity can be very dangerous, like you touched on earlier, when uncertainty comes, or maybe you get injured and you're like, "Well, what do I do now? I'm a soccer
Mm,
player. What's my identity now?" And it's just like
yeah.
flooring, you know? Have
Mhm.
you experienced that with any of the professional ladies that you've worked with?
Yeah, I definitely have, and certainly it's a changing landscape, and more of the athletes, the professional soccer players that I've been working with over the last couple of years, the female players into our professional league here in the UK, are starting to recognize that beyond the badge, they are functioning human beings. And when the athletes that I've worked with at its best, the athletes who have had a stable sense of self away from the game, so they've had other interests, or they've had a sense of what they want to do when they finish football, and we've had those conversations that always start with the end in mind. Never be afraid to have the conversation of when soccer ends for you, whether it's 6 months, 6 decades, it's going to end, and that's okay, but have the conversation early. And those players that do actually don't suffer from the mental health damage and consequences in a negative way often when they transition out of the game, or they transition away from the game due to injury, or due to other circumstances. I've certainly also seen the opposite, the flip side of the coin, in players that place all their eggs in one basket. That's a very English saying, but um, it basically means that a player that places everything in their life, their happiness, success, everything on whether they make it as a professional soccer player or not, and invariably they don't. And actually it leaves them feeling, I've heard words such as, I'm feeling empty, lost, I don't know who I am, I'm worthless, what do I do? Nobody, I have nothing to offer the world beyond soccer. And there's some really upsetting statements to hear from incredible young women that beyond the badge have so much value and can offer so much, so much of which sport and soccer particularly teaches us, doesn't it, in terms of life skills. But if there's no plan for beyond the badge, then it can be really tough for athletes to transition away from the game.
Thank you for reminding us of all that, that it's okay to have this conversation that sport will end.
Mm,
And for some young athletes, it might end after high school. They might not
yeah.
get to play at the college level, very few do. And then those who do make
Mm,
it to the college level, you might not make it to the pro level. But then if you make it to
absolutely.
the pro level, like you said, that's still going to end, even though you have the longest career of everyone else. And it can be so disorienting for an athlete entering the real world, and they don't know what their value is or their skill sets are beyond that sport. And when we were talking off air, you were saying that you don't just do sports psych for sports, you do it across business, and you have this variety, and you
Yeah.
have so much value in other areas. And I love that, and I think that's just such a good testimony to just being
Mm.
able to diversify.
Yeah, sure. And ultimately, everything I do is performance driven. I talk about well-being a lot, but I'm not talking about well-being without performance. It's all about supporting performance, but fundamentally, variety of identity and recognizing that will support performance in each of your roles, be it your role as a sister, a sports psychologist, a soccer player, and well-being, looking after your mental and physical well-being is important. And guess what? It supports performance. It drives you to be able to perform to the best that you can in whatever space you're in. Because ultimately, all of us are only able to do the best we can with the resources that we have in the moment we're in. Now, I could be talking about, the context of this podcast right now and talking to you, or whether it's a soccer player stepping up for a penalty, or there's a young girl right now sitting an exam in school. It's about doing the best you can with the resources you have in the moment that you're in. And the value of you is unchanged, whether you're a soccer player or not, whether I'm a sports psychologist that works with just professional footballers, or whether I also work with military and other leaders from other professions. My value doesn't change.
Mm. Now, I want to discuss how mental skills are good for not just people who quote unquote need it or who are quote unquote weak. Why do people who are strong or who are performing well, why do they also need a mental performance and to keep working on that and refining that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if I asked you a question now, Erica, are you currently injury free, and would you say you are currently fairly fit?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Do you go to the gym or have a personal trainer or do fitness stuff?
Yeah, every day almost.
Yeah. So I would say to you, what's the point then? Why? You just told me you were fit. Why
Right.
why would you go to the gym? Why would you work with a personal trainer?
It's more preventative, and it's also
Mm,
more because it helps me feel good, it keeps me
mhm.
healthy, and I don't want to do my gym training on the reactive side when something goes wrong.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. And just because you're fit, it doesn't mean that you can't be fitter or
Mhm.
stronger. And as you said, it's injury prevention. And it's exactly the same with working with a sports psychologist. I think that sometimes it's difficult to get past the ologist and the ology. Because it can straight away make us think of problems and issues, and you only see a sports psychologist, like you said, when things are tough. And then as soon as things aren't tough anymore, oh, well, I don't need to work with a sports psych anymore. Now, the landscape's definitely changing, but there's that element of psychology as a narrative just being seen and associated with problems and issues. But I work with athletes who are their mental skill levels their baseline skill are very good. They're mentally robust. They're resilient. They have good levels of self-confidence. And we work together to explore maintenance, so maintaining that mental fitness and emotional fitness, but also building on it so that they can be even better and understand themselves even more. And sometimes, much like a strength and conditioning coach, sometimes they work with an athlete because they're coming out of the back of an injury and there has been an issue, and they bring them back, and absolutely I do too. I work with athletes that come and they have issues or things they want to work through. But at the same time, I also work with mentally fit, emotionally fit athletes that are thriving.
Mhm. So, what are some of the things you're working on with athletes who are already mentally fit? Like, what are some things that they're being proactive about?
So it's and you and I have talked about this before. This sense of proactive resilience. So resilience, a lot of people say, oh, it's bouncing back from the tough stuff. It's when the challenges happen and we bounce back, and it makes us resilient. Why are we waiting for things to go wrong before we then feel like we have a level of resilience and our coping skills are at the level to be able to cope with the demands of that challenge or that really tough performance? The athletes that are in a really good headspace that I would work with we're working going, okay, like let's build coping strategies and what if plans for adversity that might not happen. It probably will. So we might be pre-planning injury responses. We might be pre-planning what happens when they get deselected or they are coming off the bench, they are injured. And we start putting together this toolbox of all the experiences and skills they already have, so that we are proactively preparing them to be resilient against future things such as injury or career changes or deselection, moving clubs, whatever it might be. So it's very different, obviously, athlete to athlete, player to player, but there's always something that we can develop and keep building that toolbox.
I think you might have changed my mind a little bit on the mental resiliency topic because I have been one of those coaches who has said, resiliency comes from overcoming failure and challenge, but it does make a lot of sense to front end it more and to equip our youth with, okay, this could happen. Darkness and failure
Hmm.
could be lurking at every
Hmm.
corner, and what
It
are you going to do about it?
will. Yeah, sure. And it's just the balance, like anything. It's about, you know, it just is similar to what you were saying about going to the gym and being fit. You're doing it proactively because it increases your chance of injury prevention, right? If you're fit, but it doesn't mean you won't get an injury. So you still might get one. And if you did, you're then in a position where reactively you're going to have to build back your fitness. So it's about coming at it from it's a two-way street of resilience. We've got proactive resilience. What am I being resilient against? What am I preparing for? And how can the experiences in the past help me in that proactive resilience? And then we've got the traditional, it's part of bouncing back when stuff is already tough.
Right. Now that seems like some good suggestions for parents of kids or even coaches to start having these conversations, because at the youth level, a lot of them don't even have a strength coach for their club or a sports psychologist. So is there anything else people can be working on at that level who don't have access to this type of mental skills training?
I think in terms of mental skills training, it's being as open to it as you are open to the coach. You're open to a coach to have those discussions about your technical game, about the tactical game, about your transition to attack and defend and formation. And it's about having those open conversations. And coaches often will come with a wealth of experience as well. Now, they're not trained sports psychologists, but their ability to support young athletes in understanding some of the mental skills and the mindset elements of the game, at its very best, coaches that I've worked with in the past have been some fantastic influences in supporting the young soccer player to understand why he or she is reacting in a certain way, to build confidence, to do things like confidence planners. So for parents, I'd go, well, you know what, let's think about confidence. Where does it come from for my child? What does it look like? Working with disappointment, what experiences have we got of disappointment? What is their natural reaction? As a parent, we have to really understand the huge power we have in the influence, because children will never, or very rarely, it's a quote, I can't remember who said it, children will very rarely listen to adults, but they will never fail to imitate them. So as a parent, being really mindful about, what are we role modeling right now? What are the mental skills that I'm showing as a parent that actually are transferring onto my child, so that when they're out on a soccer pitch and they're asked to play a different position, the time of the game has changed, they are on the bench, what have I role modeled that they are going to be able to cope with the demands of that situation? So we're thinking mental skills wise of self-talk, skills of imagery and visualization, goal setting. So some of the more classic mental skills are conversations to have with your kid.
That's such an important point as far as the parent modeling, because more often than not, I get parents hiring me as the panacea to their athlete's confidence. But as soon as they leave one of my gym sessions, they go back home, and certain behaviors that are being modeled, like negative self-talk from the parent, is not helping. And sometimes I wonder, how much can they outsource to a trainer, and how much can that help if that's going on with the parent? So that always concerns me a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And that's why in my previous role at the soccer club here in the UK, I ran a performance parenting program. And it wasn't to teach parents about sports psychology. It was just to go, listen, like, step into this world and let's work together. Because so often I'd hear coaches talking about dealing with parents. I mean, straight away, if you're a parent, you're going, well, okay, they have to deal with me. So it doesn't say much about the relationship. We got to work with parents, right? As I said, thank you to the parents, but it's a really tough job. So let's support them to understand better their really challenging role and the positive influence that they can have on their child's mindset for high performance, which will then last beyond the badge, beyond sport, and into the other areas of their world as a student and as a child. But it's a shame if you're the panacea of a young child's confidence. That's a lot of weight on the shoulders.
Oh, it sure is. And, I try my best and try to be as mindful as I can as far as my behavior, my body language, my words. But there's so many people that do need to work together. Like you said, it comes from the coach, it comes from the parent, and it truly takes an army. Now, I do have one question that I get a lot from parents is, when do I know if I should get a sports psychologist or a mental conditioning coach for my kid? How young is too young? Do we want to tell the kid something's wrong with them and get a sports psychologist? Like, what's the best way to approach this situation?
Yeah. Well, no one will know. No one will know the child better than the parent. In terms of if we're thinking about mental well-being concerns that are related to sport, and you have a concern about your child's confidence or the way that they're behaving, then I think what, as a parent, it's important to recognize what are the normal behaviors for my child. Like, so post game, they're always grumpy for an hour, and they always have been. And you know what? That's kind of their normal, how they are. And it's about what changes do we notice? So suddenly, actually, maybe they're a little bit more withdrawn, or they're not being themselves. And if that lasts over a period of time, so we're thinking about longer term, sustainable and noticeable behavior change in your child, then that's always a red flag or a trigger that, you know what, there could be something going on for them, whether that's in soccer and sport or elsewhere. But it's a time when opening up a conversation is hugely important, and difficult conversations are difficult for the parent because of our emotional attachment to children, as they are for the child themselves. In terms of, do we get a sports psychologist if our child is struggling, and then, you know, our child might think that he or she has got some sort of issue? That is dependent upon the environment that you've created around your child. So if you're a parent who sees therapy or sports psychology or mental skills conditioning as, you know, what if there's a problem, we're going to have to call someone like that, then yeah, absolutely, the child is going to think, oh my goodness, there's something wrong with me. You know, that's not normal. Whereas if you are a parent whose language is open around personal development, and actually you're a human first and soccer player afterwards, and you know, you work on yourself in the gym with your coach, and so actually, you know, the biggest, most powerful bit of our body, let's work on that too, and it becomes normalized, then any age, the incredible creativity of the younger kids I've worked with, like 8-9 years old, people say, oh, you know, what do you do differently with them? How do you make sure as a sports psychologist that these mental skills techniques or conversations land? Do you know what? I don't actually change an awful lot when I'm working with kids. We don't give them enough credit for what they understand, and the self-awareness that they have, and their openness, you know, because certainly when they're younger, in the real kind of the pre-adolescent brain stage, they're not yet conditioned to think that a conversation about how they think, feel, and act is because there's something wrong with them. They're open to the conversation and open to these great ideas about, you know, all the identities that they have, and, you know, how they are on a good day and a tough day. And it's as we get older and they enter the adolescent brain development stage that it can sometimes be a little bit more difficult, because the world might be telling them, oh, well, sports psychology, you know, you do that if there's something wrong with you. So I would say there's young kids have great creativity and imaginations. Open the conversation early.
I love that. And thank you for clarifying that it is important to consider getting a sports psychologist when it's more of that long-term rut, or maybe it's not just like one mistake in a game when you should hire someone,
Oh,
because sports are to make mistakes and it's going to
yeah,
happen. And then it
yeah,
becomes more reactive, and okay, we're just going to hire someone
sure.
because she messed up this day. But
Hmm.
I like that you said, hey, if there's significant and long-term changes in mood,
Yeah,
in motivation, and
yeah.
just a complete change. Is there anything else to just kind of look out for that could be a red flag?
Um, I would say just significant behavioral changes.
Mhm.
And what do you notice in them? And the narrative is important, as we've already taught. You know, how are they? What are you hearing from them? What are you hearing from them in terms of how they talk about themselves, how they talk about training and practice, how they are relating to the sport? Because, as you said, of course, like soccer players, young athletes are going to fall their motivation for playing sport is going to fluctuate. Because it's normal. I don't get up every day and bounce out of bed to go and do my interval session. But motivation is different to commitment to action. So whatever their motivation is, where are their commitment levels? What do we see from them? Are they wanting to avoid situations or avoid talking about sport? But they always used to talk about it loads, for example, classic red flag. They're kind of late to pack their bags and get ready for training. And yet they used to bounce out of bed down the stairs for training. Now, maybe that's a one-off and it's happening, occasionally, and that's fairly normal. But does it become a consistent pattern whereby actually there's a conversation to be had?
And I don't think some people are talking about maybe they just don't want to do their sport anymore, but then the parents putting the pressure on, no, you're a soccer player, you need to stick with this. And I've seen a lot of girls quit by age 14, 15 to pursue other things, but there's still pressure. No, you need to do this sport. And this is a situation that's not talked about enough. And this is a high possibility this could happen. And it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Look, they might have interest in other things and want to do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a parent, we have to be incredibly self-aware, whose life is it that we're wanting to live here? Are we living our life and we're allowing our child to develop as a separate human being and live their life? Or are we wanting to live our lives and our successes and our self-worth is hinged on whether our child is picked for soccer in the first starting 11 on a Sunday? And actually, as a parent, where do we have an opportunity to hold the mirror up to ourselves to go, oh my God, I've worked with parents before that it's not a deliberate thing. They simply didn't realize the subtle pressure and the way in which they were perhaps living their own success and dreams and expectations through their child. So again, this isn't, something that in all parents is a deliberate thing and they're bad parents. It's let's just hold the mirror up to ourselves and go, where am I in all of this? How much of this is me? And where does the line between my wants and needs, where does that cross into my child's wants and needs in soccer? Let's just keep a check on it.
Oh my gosh, that self-reflection is just so key. And I think you're right. A lot of parents don't realize they're doing it.
Sure.
And I've heard some parents just try to confirm, hey, I'm not that parent. I'm not that parent who puts pressure on their kid. And it's like, oh, you're probably that parent. You need to take a look. And it's like, it's okay. Just like take a look and reflect.
Yeah, because it's a really tough job because as a parent, you're also wearing multiple hats because as a parent, you are the child's your child's counselor, coach, educator, friend, taxi driver, bank account manager, teacher, tutor. I mean, my goodness, a lot of the time parents don't have time to sit and really go, oh, okay, where's my influence on my child and how does that look? Because they're too busy trying to spin multiple plates, which is why the program that my colleague and I run over in the UK here, we run a performance parenting program and we do it to support the people supporting the people, which is, parents or I love working with and through coaches again, because we've got to look out for the people, looking out for the athletes, and then the athletes benefit.
Oh, this has been such an amazing and refreshing conversation. I know everyone's going to find it so valuable. Is there anything you want to leave everyone with?
What a massive question. I think the thing to leave everyone with is actually a young child is a child, exactly that. They are a human first and a soccer player second. And what is it about the world that we are creating for our child that is supporting them to develop the tools and the resilience and the skills needed to cope with change and transitions and endings?
You did great on that one. So thank you for that insight. Now, where can people find you? I know you're on Instagram. Is there anywhere else?
Yeah, so I post weekly content on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter at Sarah Sports Psych. And I can be found at www.performance-edge.org. I'm always open to DMs and questions. As I said, I have a book with a colleague that will be coming out before Christmas. So we'll look out for that. I'll get in touch with you when the book's out and ask you then, Erica, if you wanted to share that with your network so that people can know where to find it. Then more than happy that you do that. It's just been great. I really appreciate you having me on today. So the title of the book is Sports Performance Parenting, Child First, Athlete Second, a holistic approach to sports parenting. So super excited. We've got Judy Murray, who is Andy Murray, the tennis player. She's doing the an intro for us. We have lots of interviews with famous athletes, Olympic athletes across soccer and many sports, and their parents. So some real insight to what it's like to be a parent of a high performance athlete.
Brilliant. This book sounds fantastic.
Shameless plug.
Yeah, no,
I'm sorry.
I'm definitely going to get it myself. And you said that, well, we're recording in October of 2022 now. So hopefully around the holidays, we can get it as a holiday gift. So that's super exciting.
I'm really hoping so.
So what I'll do is I'll link Sarah's information in the caption below, everyone. So check her out on Twitter, Instagram. I also have her website, so you can keep an eye on the book release as well. Sarah, thank you again for this conversation, and I'll see you guys on next week's episode.